The morning started like any other day aboard the USS Discovery, until the communications console erupted with signals that should not have existed. Captain Jake Morrison was reviewing supply reports when Lieutenant Lisa Chen called out from her station, with a voice that carried both excitement and fear. The transmission was coming from somewhere near the moon, and it was definitely not human. Dr. Elena Rodriguez dropped her coffee mug when she heard the translation coming through the ship's speakers. The voice was calm and measured, speaking perfect English with just enough of an accent to remind everyone that this was not a person from Earth. "We are the Zephyrian delegation from the Galactic Scientific Consortium. We come in peace and request permission to establish formal contact with the species of Earth. Our vessel awaits your response in lunar orbit." The message repeated 3 times before falling silent, leaving the bridge crew staring at each other in stunned silence. Commander Ryan Blake was the first to recover, immediately ordering all defense systems to stand by while maintaining a peaceful posture. Morrison knew that this moment would change everything for humanity, but he had no idea just how dangerous this first contact would prove to be. Within hours, every major government on Earth was involved in heated discussions about how to respond. Dr. Rodriguez found herself appointed as the lead scientific advisor for the contact team, while Blake would handle military concerns and Morrison would lead the diplomatic mission. Security advisor Colonel Amy Foster argued strongly for extreme caution, pointing out that any species capable of reaching Earth undetected possessed technology far beyond human capabilities. Her warnings were noted, but ultimately overruled by the excitement of making peaceful contact with an advanced alien civilization. The Zephyrian ship appeared on their screens like nothing anyone had ever imagined. It was massive, easily the size of a small city, with organic curves that seemed to pulse with inner light. The hull appeared to be part machine and part living tissue, covered in what looked like scales that shifted color in response to some unknown stimulus. Ambassador Veltar introduced himself through the communication link, with a voice that carried an odd musical quality. He explained that his people had been observing Earth for some time and were impressed by human potential. The Zephyrians themselves were unlike anything in human science fiction. Veltar stood nearly 8 feet tall with a crystalline exoskeleton that refracted light into beautiful patterns across his forearms. His face was almost human in basic structure, but with large eyes that seemed to contain swirling galaxies and a mouth that moved in ways that suggested a completely different vocal anatomy. When he spoke, translucent membranes along his neck vibrated in harmony with his words, creating an effect that was both beautiful and unsettling. The ambassador explained that the Galactic Scientific Consortium was a peaceful organization dedicated to understanding the diversity of life throughout the galaxy. Every species that wished to join their community underwent a series of standard assessments to determine their capabilities and potential contributions. These tests were described as simple evaluations of reflexes, coordination, and problem-solving abilities that would help the consortium understand how best to integrate humanity into galactic society. In return for cooperation, Earth would receive advanced technology and knowledge that would accelerate human development by thousands of years. Morrison felt the weight of speaking for all humanity as he agreed to preliminary discussions. The human delegation would visit the Zephyrian ship to learn more about these assessments and what joining the consortium would mean for Earth. Dr. Rodriguez volunteered immediately, her scientific curiosity overriding any concerns about the risks involved. Blake insisted on a full security detail, while Foster continued to express reservations about the entire situation. The team would include military volunteers and civilian specialists to provide a representative sample of human capabilities. Sergeant Kevin Thompson and Lieutenant Sarah Martinez volunteered from the military contingent, both experienced soldiers with impressive service records. Dr. Alex Chen, a physicist specializing in neural networks, joined the civilian volunteers along with engineer Katie Williams, whose innovative designs had revolutionized spacecraft construction. Each volunteer understood that they would be representing not just themselves, but all of humanity, in whatever tests the aliens had planned. None of them suspected that they were actually volunteering to be evaluated as potential threats to an expansionist empire. The shuttle ride to the Zephyrian vessel gave the human team their first close look at truly alien technology. The ship's docking bay opened like a flowering plant, with surfaces that seemed to recognize their approach and adjust accordingly. The artificial gravity felt slightly wrong, as if the ship was generating the effect through methods that human physics had not yet discovered. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors. Not mechanical noise, but something that sounded almost like the ship itself was breathing. Katie Williams found herself taking mental notes on everything she observed, her engineering mind fascinated by technologies that seemed to blend biology and machinery in impossible ways. Ambassador Veltar greeted them personally in what he called the hospitality chamber, a room filled with surfaces that adjusted themselves to accommodate human height and comfort needs. Other Zephyrians moved through the background, all sharing the same crystalline appearance but with variations in color and size that suggested either genetic diversity or perhaps social rankings. The aliens seemed genuinely friendly and curious about their human guests, asking questions about Earth culture and human biology that indicated extensive prior observation. Dr. Rodriguez noted that their questions focused heavily on human stress responses and decision-making under pressure, topics that seemed oddly specific for general cultural exchange. The tour of the testing facilities raised subtle warning flags that only Blake seemed to notice. The chambers were clearly designed for far more than simple coordination tests, with equipment that looked suspiciously like combat simulators and threat assessment devices. When Thompson asked about the military-looking apparatus, Veltar explained that the consortium needed to understand each species' defensive capabilities to better protect them from hostile forces in the galaxy. This explanation satisfied most of the human delegation, but Blake made mental notes about exit routes and potential defensive positions throughout the ship. As the day progressed, the humans began to notice small inconsistencies in the Zephyrian explanations. Veltar spoke of hundreds of species in the consortium, but the ship's corridors contained no evidence of this diversity. The technology appeared to be designed specifically for Zephyrian physiology with no accommodations for other body types or environmental needs. Dr. Chen observed that the bio-neural interfaces they would be tested on seemed far more sophisticated than necessary for simple reflex measurements, with capabilities that suggested they could map and analyze neural patterns in extraordinary detail. Colonel Foster's concerns proved prescient when Blake discovered what appeared to be weapon systems disguised as mining equipment in one of the restricted sections of the ship. The Zephyrians quickly explained these as asteroid processing tools necessary for their long-distance space travel, but the power readings Blake detected suggested capabilities far beyond simple mining operations. The human delegation found themselves in an increasingly uncomfortable position, committed to the testing program, but growing more suspicious of their host's true intentions with each passing hour. Despite the mounting concerns, the testing was scheduled to begin the following day. The human volunteers spent their last evening of preparation reviewing the procedures and trying to understand what they might be walking into. Dr. Rodriguez ran calculations on the bio-neural interface specifications they had been shown, while Williams analyzed the ship's technical systems for any clues about Zephyrian capabilities and limitations. Thompson and Martinez went through combat scenarios in their minds, professional soldiers preparing for unknown challenges. None of them realized that they were about to break an alien assessment system that had successfully evaluated nearly 1,000 different species across the galaxy, or that their performance would ultimately save humanity from extinction at the hands of a civilization that had perfected the art of disguising genocide as scientific research. The testing chamber exceeded every expectation the human volunteers had formed during their tour of the ship. The room itself seemed alive, with walls that pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns and a ceiling that displayed what looked like star maps from a dozen different worlds. The bio-neural interfaces rose from the floor like flowering plants, their crystalline structures designed to interface directly with nervous systems in ways that human technology could barely imagine. Technician Crixlon, a smaller Zephyrian with silver-tinted exoskeleton plates, explained that the machine could measure neural impulses faster than conscious thought and predict behavioral patterns with accuracy approaching certainty. The first series of tests seemed innocent enough to put everyone at ease. Simple reaction time measurements that any human medical facility might use, asking the volunteers to respond to lights and sounds with basic movements. Sergeant Thompson excelled at these preliminary assessments, his military training evident in the crisp precision of his responses. Lieutenant Martinez showed similar capabilities, her reflexes honed by years of combat simulations and real-world deployments. The Zephyrian observers nodded approvingly at these expected results, making notes on devices that looked more like living organisms than electronic tablets. Dr. Chen surprised everyone, including himself, by performing nearly as well as the trained soldiers despite having no military background. His years of laboratory work had apparently developed hand-eye coordination and pattern recognition abilities that translated well to the alien testing protocols. Katie Williams proved even more surprising, her engineering background giving her an intuitive understanding of the machine's requirements that allowed her to anticipate test patterns and respond before the stimuli were fully presented. Crixlon paused the testing twice to recalibrate his equipment, clearly not expecting such performance from what their observations had led them to believe were non-combatant humans. As the morning progressed, the test became more complex and obviously combat-oriented. The bio-neural interfaces began presenting three-dimensional holographic scenarios that required split-second tactical decisions under simulated battlefield conditions. The volunteers found themselves choosing between multiple targets, prioritizing threats, and making life-or-death decisions while the alien machinery monitored every neural pathway involved in their thought processes. The Zephyrians claimed these scenarios were necessary to understand human stress responses and decision-making capabilities. But the military nature of the simulations was becoming impossible to disguise. Thompson and Martinez adapted to the combat scenarios with professional efficiency, but their responses followed predictable military doctrine that the testing machine seemed able to categorize and analyze without difficulty. Dr. Chen approached the scenarios from a scientific perspective, treating each simulation like a research problem to be solved systematically. His unconventional solutions confused the monitoring systems, which had been programmed to expect either aggressive or defensive responses but not analytical problem-solving, approaches that turned combat scenarios into intellectual puzzles requiring creative solutions. Katie Williams proved to be the most disruptive element in the testing protocol. When presented with a scenario involving defending a position with limited resources, she ignored the available weapons entirely and instead analyzed the environmental factors to create improvised solutions. Her approach involved using structural weaknesses in the simulated buildings, redirecting energy flows from damaged equipment, and creating tactical advantages that the original scenario programmers had never considered possible. The bio-neural interface began generating warning signals as it struggled to categorize her responses within any known behavioral patterns. The afternoon testing session pushed the scenarios to their maximum complexity. Multi-layered simulations required the volunteers to coordinate with virtual allies while managing multiple simultaneous threats across different battlefield environments. The testing machine expected subjects to either excel in individual combat or group coordination, but not both simultaneously. Human neural architecture, shaped by millions of years of evolution as both pack hunters and individual survivors, proved capable of parallel processing that broke the alien classification systems. Completely, Dr. Martinez demonstrated this most dramatically when presented with a scenario requiring her to lead a defensive action while simultaneously operating complex technical equipment under enemy fire. Her brain activity showed patterns that the monitoring systems had never encountered in their database of 847 previously tested species. She was simultaneously calculating tactical positions, monitoring team communication, analyzing technical readouts, and maintaining situational awareness of changing battlefield conditions. The machine's neural mapping algorithms began generating error messages as they attempted to track decision-making processes that followed no linear progression. From the observation deck, Captain Morrison and Dr. Rodriguez watched the testing with growing concern. The Zephyrian technicians were clearly becoming agitated as their equipment registered readings that fell far outside expected parameters. Ambassador Veltar spent increasing amounts of time in hushed conferences with his scientific team, their musical voices taking on urgent harmonics that suggested serious problems. Blake noticed that security personnel had begun appearing in the background, armed Zephyrians whose presence had not been mentioned in the original testing protocols. The bio-neural interfaces themselves began showing signs of strain as the day wore on. Cooling systems activated more frequently, and the crystalline structures that interfaced with the human volunteers started displaying color patterns that Crixalon admitted indicated system stress. The testing machine had been designed to analyze species with neural patterns that followed predictable evolutionary pathways. But human consciousness appeared to operate according to principles that their models could not accommodate or predict. Each volunteer was generating data streams that required more processing power than the previous 700 species. Combined, Katie Williams triggered the first major system malfunction when she began treating a complex siege scenario like an engineering problem, rather than a military challenge. Instead of following conventional tactical doctrine, she analyzed the underlying physics of the simulation and began exploiting what she recognized as programming limitations. Her approach involved using simulated gravity fields and energy distribution patterns in ways that the scenario designers had never anticipated, essentially hacking the test environment through intuitive understanding of its operational principles. The bioneural interface monitoring. Her brain activity began overheating as it tried to process thought patterns that seemed to rewrite the rules of the simulation in real time. Dr. Chen caused even more severe problems when he started analyzing the testing scenarios themselves rather than simply responding to them. His scientific training led him to recognize patterns in how the challenges were structured, and he began predicting upcoming scenario elements based on mathematical models he developed during the testing process. The monitoring system found itself trying to track a mind that was simultaneously participating in the test and reverse engineering its design principles, creating feedback loops that threatened to crash the entire neural analysis network. As the testing session neared its end, the accumulated system strain began causing visible problems throughout the chamber. Warning lights activated along the walls, and the bioneural interfaces started displaying erratic color patterns that clearly indicated serious malfunctions. Crixalon reported to Ambassador Veltar that the testing machine was experiencing processing errors unlike anything in their extensive database. The human neural patterns were not just unusual but actively disruptive to systems designed to analyze and categorize biological intelligence across hundreds of different evolutionary backgrounds. The final test of the day involved all 4 volunteers working together in a complex scenario that required coordinated response to multiple simultaneous crises. The testing machine attempted to analyze not just individual human capabilities, but how human minds functioned when working together as a team. This proved to be the final straw for systems already pushed beyond their design limits. The volunteers instinctively began communicating through subtle cues and shared understanding that had never been programmed into the simulation, creating group intelligence behaviors that the monitoring systems could not parse or predict. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the testing chamber, as the bioneural interfaces registered cascading system failures that threatened to spread to other ship systems. For the first time in over 2,000 years of operation, the Zephyrian assessment machine was forced to admit that it had encountered a form of intelligence it could neither understand nor safely analyze. The emergency shutdown alarms echoed through the testing chamber as the bioneural interfaces went into protective mode to prevent permanent damage to their crystalline processing cores. Crixalon frantically manipulated controls that seemed to respond to his thoughts rather than physical touch, his silver exoskeleton plates shifting to colors that clearly indicated extreme stress. The testing machine that had successfully analyzed nearly 1,000 different species across the galaxy was experiencing system failures that its designers had considered impossible. Every attempt to process human neural patterns resulted in cascading errors that threatened to crash not just the testing equipment, but the ship's primary computational networks. Ambassador Veltar arrived in the chamber with his scientific team, their musical voices creating harmonics that the human observers had learned to recognize as deep concern. Chief Scientist Nixara began examining the system logs with equipment that projected holographic displays of the failed analysis attempts. The data stream showed neural activity patterns that defied every model in their extensive database, brain functions that seemed to operate on principles their science could not explain or categorize. Dr. Rodriguez watched the alien scientist's work and began to understand that humanity had accidentally revealed capabilities that were completely outside Zephyrian experience. The 4 human volunteers remained connected to the bioneural interfaces despite the system failures, their minds still partially linked to alien technology that was struggling to comprehend what it was measuring. Katie Williams found herself experiencing strange sensations as the machine attempted to map neural pathways that its programming insisted could not exist. Her consciousness seemed to touch the edges of the alien computational network, giving her brief glimpses of how the testing system actually functioned. She realized that the machine was not just measuring their responses, but actively trying to predict future behavior based on observed neural patterns, a process that human unpredictability was making impossible. Dr. Chen experienced similar sensations as his scientific mind began analyzing the bio-neural interface from the inside. His brain automatically started reverse engineering the alien technology, even as it was supposedly being studied by that same technology. The feedback loops created by this process were causing some of the worst system errors, as the machine found itself trying to analyze a mind that was simultaneously analyzing it in return. Chen realized that human curiosity and tendency to understand how things work was fundamentally incompatible with being passively studied by alien science. Thompson and Martinez were having their own unusual experiences as their military training interacted with the alien neural interfaces in unexpected ways. Their brains had been conditioned to constantly evaluate threats and tactical situations, processes that continued even while connected to the testing system. The machine found itself trying to analyze minds that were automatically assessing the alien technology as potential threats or tactical advantages. Every scenario presented to them was simultaneously being experienced as a test and evaluated as intelligence about alien capabilities and weaknesses. Captain Morrison demanded an explanation from Ambassador Veltar as the situation in the testing chamber became increasingly chaotic. The Zephyrian diplomat admitted that such system failures had never occurred in over 2 millennia of species assessment, a revelation that raised immediate questions about what these assessments were actually designed to accomplish. Veltar's explanation that the tests measured species potential for integration into galactic society sounded increasingly hollow as emergency technicians worked frantically to prevent the failures from spreading to other ship systems. Commander Blake began putting together pieces of information that painted a disturbing picture of their situation. The testing equipment was clearly designed for more than scientific assessment, with capabilities that suggested military analysis and threat evaluation. The Zephyrian reactions to the system failures indicated that the results of these tests determined something far more significant than simple galactic citizenship. Blake started considering emergency evacuation procedures while maintaining a diplomatic facade, knowing that any sudden movement might trigger responses from the armed Zephyrians who had appeared throughout the ship. Chief Scientist Nixara made the first direct reference to the true nature of the testing program when she informed Veltar that the humans were generating threat assessment profiles unlike anything in their classification system. Her words were translated by the communication devices, but the implications were clear to the listening humans. These were not integration assessments, but military evaluations designed to determine whether a species posed a danger to Zephyrian interests. The system failures meant that humanity could not be properly classified within their threat matrix, creating an unprecedented problem for an empire that had built its expansion strategy on predictable species. Categorization. Dr. Rodriguez began correlating the observed system failures with what she knew about human neural development and evolutionary history. Humans had evolved under conditions that required both individual survival skills and complex social cooperation, creating brain structures that could rapidly switch between different types of thinking. Most species apparently developed along more linear paths that made their neural patterns predictable and analyzable. Human consciousness seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, making it impossible for the alien testing system to create the simplified models it required for threat assessment. The bio-neural interfaces began displaying new types of errors as they attempted to compensate for their inability to process human neural patterns. Warning lights indicated that the crystalline processing cores were operating beyond safe parameters, generating heat that required additional cooling systems to prevent permanent damage. Crixlon reported that the machine was attempting to create new analysis categories specifically for human neural patterns. But each attempt resulted in logical contradictions that crashed the evaluation algorithms before they could complete their assessments. Katie Williams experienced a breakthrough moment when her engineer's instincts allowed her to understand how the alien technology was trying to categorize her thought processes. She realized that the machine expected neural activity to follow hierarchical patterns, where thoughts led to decisions in predictable sequences. Human minds apparently worked more like parallel processing systems, running multiple thought threads simultaneously and combining them in ways that created solutions the machine had never been programmed to anticipate. Her recognition of this fundamental incompatibility caused another cascade of system errors as the bioneural interface detected that she understood its operational principles. War Leader. Thexvan appeared in the testing chamber with a full security detail, his larger frame and darker exoskeleton plates clearly marking him as a military commander. His presence added a new level of tension to the already stressful situation, as he demanded immediate threat assessments from the scientific team. Nixara was forced to admit that the testing system could not generate reliable threat evaluations for the human species, a failure that appeared to have serious implications for Zephyrian standard procedures. Thexvan's response suggested that species which could not be properly assessed were typically handled through more direct methods. The AI. Human volunteers found themselves in an increasingly dangerous position as the Zephyrian leadership struggled with the implications of the system failures. Their neural patterns had proven too complex for analysis by technology designed to evaluate hundreds of different species, marking them as either completely harmless or potentially catastrophic threats. The alien classification system had no middle ground, no category for species that could not be properly understood or predicted. Morrison realized that humanity's survival might depend on resolving this classification problem before the Zephyrians decided that unknown threats were too dangerous to tolerate. As the testing session reached its chaotic conclusion, the bioneural interfaces finally stabilized in emergency mode, their crystalline structures flickering with patterns that indicated system preservation rather than active analysis. The 4 human volunteers remained connected, but were no longer being actively studied, giving them a temporary reprieve from the neural scanning that had been causing so many problems. However, this also meant that the Zephyrians still had no clear picture of human capabilities or threat potential, leaving both species in a standoff where neither side fully understood what they were dealing with. The stage was set for revelations that would force both humans and Zephyrians to confront truths about their respective civilizations that would change the course of first contact forever. The confrontation came when war leader Thexvan demanded immediate answers that chief scientist Nixara could not provide. The testing system's complete failure to categorize human neural patterns had created a crisis that threatened the foundation of Zephyrian expansion policy. Ambassador Veltar found himself forced to reveal truths that were never meant to be shared with species under assessment. The Galactic Scientific Consortium was not the peaceful research organization they claimed to be, but rather the scientific arm of a vast empire that had been conquering and enslaving worlds for over 2 millennia through a carefully disguised process of threat evaluation and elimination. Dr. Rodriguez felt her blood turn cold as Veltar explained their classification system with the detached efficiency of someone describing a manufacturing process. Species that scored low on their assessment tests were offered limited technology and became client states, providing resources and labor for the Zephyrian Empire in exchange for protection and basic scientific advancement. Those that scored moderately were left alone to develop naturally, posing no threat to Zephyrian interests and requiring no immediate attention. The third category was reserved for species that showed dangerous potential for rapid technological advancement or military capability that could eventually challenge Zephyrian dominance. Commander Blake demanded to know what happened to species in the third category, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Thexvan explained with the casual brutality of someone who had overseen the process many times before. Dangerous species were eliminated before they could develop spacefaring military technology, typically through weaponized asteroids or engineered plagues that made their extinction appear natural. The Zephyrians had perfected genocide disguised as cosmic accidents, leaving no evidence of their involvement and no survivors. To warn other species about the true nature of first contact, the revelation that 847 species had undergone these assessments over the past 2,000 years painted a horrifying picture of systematic galactic conquest. Captain Morrison realized that humanity was witnessing the prelude to their own potential extermination. a process that had been refined through centuries of practice on countless other worlds. Only one species in their entire database had been classified as requiring immediate elimination, a race called the Keth Mori, whose homeworld had been destroyed 400 years ago in what galactic records showed as a natural asteroid impact. Chief Scientist Nixara admitted that the human assessment results were unlike anything they had encountered in their extensive experience with species evaluation. The testing system had been designed based on neural patterns from hundreds of successfully classified species, creating models that could predict behavior and capabilities with near-perfect accuracy. Human minds operated according to principles that broke these models completely, generating neural activity that the system could neither understand nor safely categorize within their threat assessment. Matrixed Dr. Chen realized that humanity's unique evolutionary history had created exactly the type of unpredictable intelligence that the Zephyrian system was designed to identify and eliminate. Humans had evolved as both individual hunters and pack cooperators, developing neural plasticity that allowed rapid adaptation to changing conditions. Most species apparently evolved along more specialized paths that made their capabilities easier to predict and counter. Human consciousness combined analytical thinking with intuitive problem-solving in ways that created solutions no algorithmic system could anticipate or prepare. For the 4 volunteers still connected to the bio-neural interfaces found themselves in an increasingly precarious position as the Zephyrian leadership debated their fate. War leader Thexvan advocated for immediate elimination protocols, arguing that a species capable of breaking their assessment system represented an unacceptable risk to the Empire. The fact that humans had accidentally disrupted technology that had successfully analyzed nearly 1,000 different species suggested capabilities that could eventually threaten Zephyrian supremacy throughout the galaxy. Captain Morrison began implementing emergency protocols while maintaining the appearance of continued diplomatic cooperation. His coded transmissions to Earth's defense networks carried warnings about the true nature of their alien visitors and the immediate threat to planetary survival. The message included everything they had learned about Zephyrian capabilities and weaknesses, information that might prove crucial if humanity survived the next few hours. Blake positioned himself strategically within the testing chamber, calculating possible defensive actions despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Nixara found herself caught between scientific curiosity and imperial loyalty as she studied the unprecedented data generated by human neural patterns. The testing system's failures had revealed aspects of consciousness that Zephyrian science had never encountered, suggesting possibilities for advancing their understanding of intelligence and behavior. She argued that humanity represented a unique research opportunity that would be lost forever if they followed standard elimination protocols for unclassifiable species. Her position created a critical division within the Zephyrian command structure that bought precious time for human survival. The human volunteers realized that their continued connection to the bio-neural interfaces gave them access to information about Zephyrian technology and capabilities that could prove vital for Earth's defense. Katie Williams began using her engineering knowledge to understand the alien systems from the inside, mapping technological weaknesses and limitations that human forces might be able to exploit. Her mind automatically began designing countermeasures and defensive strategies based on what she learned about Zephyrian ship construction and weapon systems. Dr. Chen found that his scientific training allowed him to analyze the philosophical implications of their situation in ways that confused the monitoring systems even further. His approach to the crisis as an intellectual problem rather than a survival situation created neural patterns that the alien technology interpreted as evidence of dangerous analytical capabilities. The machine's attempts to predict his responses continued to fail because he treated the entire scenario as a research opportunity rather than a threat to be overcome or evaded. Thompson and Martinez used their military experience to gather tactical intelligence while appearing to cooperate with continued testing procedures. Their professional assessment of Zephyrian security measures and ship vulnerabilities provided crucial information about potential escape routes and defensive positions. The bio-neural interfaces monitoring their thought processes detected strategic planning activities, but could not predict the specific actions these plans might produce, adding to the system's classification difficulties. Ambassador Veltar found himself in an impossible position as the crisis escalated beyond anything in Zephyrian protocols. Standard procedures called for immediate elimination of unclassifiable species, but the complete failure of their assessment system meant they had no reliable data about human capabilities or threat potential. Attacking a species whose abilities they could not measure or predict involved risks that their careful expansion strategy was designed to avoid. The Empire had succeeded for 2 millennia by never fighting opponents they did not fully understand. War Leader Thexavan grew increasingly impatient with the scientific debate as he considered the military implications of their situation. Every moment of delay gave humanity more time to prepare defenses and learn about Zephyrian weaknesses. His experience with previous elimination campaigns taught him that swift action was essential for maintaining operational security and preventing target species from developing effective countermeasures. However, the unprecedented nature of the human neural analysis failures made him reluctant to proceed without better intelligence about their actual capabilities. The standoff reached a critical point when the bioneural interfaces detected that the human volunteers were actively analyzing Zephyrian technology rather than passively submitting to evaluation. Katie Williams had begun reverse engineering the alien systems with such effectiveness that her neural patterns were creating feedback loops in the monitoring equipment. The machine realized it was being studied by the subjects it was supposed to be analyzing, a situation that triggered emergency security protocols throughout the ship. The revelation that humans could comprehend and potentially improve upon Zephyrian technology forced both species toward a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Earth but the future balance of power in the galaxy. The solution came from the most human response possible in a crisis that had no precedent in Zephyrian experience. Instead of attempting to fight or flee from superior alien technology, Dr. Chen proposed that they help fix the broken assessment system that had failed so dramatically during their testing. His suggestion seemed insane to everyone present, until Katie Williams realized that this approach would demonstrate human capabilities far more effectively than any combat scenario could. They would show the Zephyrians exactly what made humanity dangerous by solving problems that alien science could not handle. Captain Morrison recognized the brilliance of this strategy immediately and endorsed the proposal despite its obvious risks. Rather than being evaluated by alien technology, humans would collaborate with that technology to create something better than either species could achieve alone. This demonstration would prove that humanity represented neither a threat to be eliminated nor a client species to be enslaved, but rather a potential partner whose unique capabilities could benefit both civilizations. The approach required convincing the Zephyrians to trust a species they could not understand or predict. Ambassador Veltar initially rejected the proposal as impossible, explaining that their bioneural assessment technology represented thousands of years of scientific development by some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy. The idea that a primitive species could improve upon Zephyrian science seemed absurd, until Chief Scientist Nick Serra pointed out that their current system had completely failed to analyze human neural patterns. Perhaps the problem was not that humans were unanalyzable, but that their analysis methods were fundamentally inadequate for understanding non-linear consciousness. Katie Williams began explaining her understanding of the system's limitations while still connected to the bioneural interface. Her words transmitted directly through the alien technology as her thoughts influenced its operation. She described how the assessment machine expected consciousness to follow hierarchical patterns, where thoughts led to decisions in predictable sequences, but human minds operated more like distributed processing networks. Multiple thought streams ran simultaneously and combined in ways that created solutions neither stream could have produced independently, breaking analysis algorithms designed for simpler mental architectures. Dr. Chen expanded on Williams' observations by proposing modifications to the neural mapping algorithms that would allow the system to handle parallel processing consciousness. His approach involved creating analytical frameworks that could track multiple simultaneous thought processes without trying to force them into linear decision trees. The bioneural interface would need to abandon its attempts to predict behavior based on single-path analysis and instead model consciousness as a complex adaptive system with emergent properties that could not be reduced to simple cause and effect relationships. War Leader Thexavan watched these discussions with growing alarm, as he realized that the humans were not just understanding Zephyrian technology, but actively improving it in real time. Thompson and Martinez contributed tactical perspectives that enhanced the system's ability to analyze combat decision-making under stress, while Dr. Rodriguez provided biological insights that helped explain why human neural patterns differed so dramatically from other species. The collaborative approach was generating innovations that neither species could have achieved independently, proving human claims about partnership potential more effectively than any diplomatic argument. Technician Crixalon began implementing the human-suggested modifications under Nixara's supervision, his silver exoskeleton plates shifting to colors that indicated excitement rather than stress for the first time since the testing began. The bio-neural interfaces responded to the algorithmic changes by successfully mapping human thought patterns that had previously caused system crashes. For the first time in Zephyrian history, their assessment technology was analyzing a form of consciousness that operated on principles their science had never encountered or imagined possible. The implications of this success terrified Thexvan more than the original system failures had. Humans were not just adapting to alien technology, but improving it beyond its original capabilities, demonstrating exactly the kind of rapid technological advancement that Zephyrian expansion doctrine identified as an existential threat. Species that could enhance Zephyrian science within hours of first contact possessed capabilities that could eventually surpass the Empire's technological advantages, undermining the basis of their galactic dominance. Dr. Rodriguez seized this moment of technological demonstration to present the Zephyrians with a fundamental choice about humanity's future. They could attempt to destroy a species whose capabilities extended beyond their ability to measure or predict, risking a conflict with unknown parameters and potentially catastrophic consequences. Alternatively, they could establish genuine partnership with a species whose problem-solving abilities could help both civilizations advance beyond their current limitations. The decision would determine not just human survival but the future development of Zephyrian society itself. Chief Scientist Nixara found herself advocating strongly for the partnership option as she observed the remarkable improvements human collaboration had brought to their assessment systems. The technological advances achieved in a single day of cooperation exceeded progress they had made in decades of independent research. Human neural architecture appeared to complement Zephyrian analytical methods in ways that created synergistic effects, suggesting that long-term collaboration could benefit both species far more than traditional conquest or client-state relationships. Commander Blake had been quietly observing the power dynamics within the Zephyrian delegation throughout these discussions, noting how the scientific faction led by Nixara was gaining influence over the military faction led by Thexavan. The demonstration of human technological collaboration had shifted the internal debate from threat assessment to opportunity evaluation, creating political divisions that humanity could potentially exploit for survival. Blake began suggesting additional collaborative projects that would further demonstrate human value as partners rather than threats. The breakthrough moment came when Katie Williams proposed a radical modification to the bio-neural interface, design that would allow it to analyze not just individual consciousness but collective intelligence phenomena. Her suggestion involved creating network protocols that could study how multiple minds work together to solve problems beyond the capabilities of any individual, opening research possibilities that Zephyrian science had never considered. The proposal demonstrated that humans could contribute insights that would advance alien understanding of consciousness itself. Ambassador Veltar found himself facing a decision that had no precedent in Zephyrian imperial history. Standard doctrine provided clear procedures for dealing with client species, neutral neighbors, and dangerous threats, but offered no guidance for handling potential equals who could contribute to rather than detract from imperial capabilities. The complete failure of their assessment system to categorize humanity had revealed the limitations of their entire approach to galactic expansion and species classification. War Leader Thexavan made one final attempt to convince the delegation to follow standard elimination protocols, arguing that allowing humanity to survive represented an unacceptable long-term risk to imperial security. However, his arguments were undermined by the obvious. benefits that human collaboration had already provided to their technology and the unknown consequences of attacking a species whose capabilities remained largely unmeasured. The risk-averse strategy that had built the Zephyrian Empire now worked in humanity's favor. The final resolution came when Veltar announced that humanity would be granted a completely new classification within Zephyrian records. Provisional partners pending further collaborative evaluation. This unprecedented decision effectively removed Earth from immediate threat, while establishing frameworks for ongoing cooperation between the species. The Zephyrian ship would withdraw from the solar system to allow humanity time to prepare for more extensive contact, but communication protocols would remain open for future diplomatic and scientific exchange. Captain Morrison's final report to Earth's governments emphasized that humanity had survived first contact, not through superior technology or military strength, but by demonstrating the uniquely human ability to find collaborative solutions to problems that others considered impossible. The failed alien assessment had accidentally revealed that human consciousness operated on principles that made them too unpredictable to safely eliminate and too valuable to ignore. Earth now faced the challenge of preparing for a future where humanity would need to prove worthy of partnership with a galactic civilization that had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds. Through careful evaluation of every species they encountered, the assessment machine could not handle the results of testing human reflexes, because those reflexes included the most dangerous capability any species could possess, the ability to adapt and improve faster than others could predict or control.